So my name is James Pappas, and I'm your Pecha Kucha guinea pig starting off here. And I'm going to be talking about the Housing Affordability Strategy Project. My first tightly timed slide is so.
Where's our text?
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Okay. Great.
We're totally going to do it from this point forward.
Great. So I thought that we could start tonight by talking a little bit about the problems that we're trying to address through the project. Okay, so as we know, rents and prices have been going through the roof in the Bay Area. On the left, you have housing prices. On the right, rents. You can see we've outpaced in San Francisco the rest of the Bay Area, and we as a region have outpaced California. And of course, we know that San Francisco and the region have outpaced most of the rest of the country in terms of housing price rise. So in fact, housing prices in the Bay Area have increased at twice the rate of inflation since the 1990s. You can see in the late 90s that real divergence, and it's continued unabated to today, and it's actually gotten even worse in the last couple of years. So what explains this? Well, partly housing production. You can see San Francisco represented in orange versus the region in gray. San Francisco didn't produce much housing. Now we're producing more. Down at the bottom are more recent decades. But the region overall is producing much less housing than it did. You can sort of see a projection of the trend. We're also adding jobs. So at the bottom are the United States and California, jobs per housing unit added, and then in orange are most Bay Area counties. San Francisco has kind of kept adding jobs while not adding a ton of housing, but the rest of the region actually got a lot worse. So our suburbs, like San Mateo, for example, added 3 jobs per housing unit. But it's not just jobs, it's also income. And you can see population and employment grew just by 20 or 30%, but housing prices went up 98%, and income in aggregate went up 87%. So what's the result locally? At the top, we have the highest income group, the change from 1990 to 2015. We had a massive growth in high-income households. Meanwhile, at the lower end, low and middle end, we've lost low and moderate income households in San Francisco over this 25-year period. But looking at the region tells us, hey, maybe, because you could say, oh, maybe those households just got richer and we had households moving up from low to high income. Well, the region also gained a lot of high income households, but actually gained low income households. So I think that provides a good contrast with San Francisco. And then this is showing cost or rent burden for renter households by income group. And again, it's 1990 versus 2015. The interesting thing is we're generally losing these households, but severe rent burden, shown in orange, is getting worse. So we're not only losing low and moderate income households, but our cost burdens are getting worse. So how do we set housing goals for ourselves? Well, we actually let the regional agencies and state agencies do it for us through the RHNA process, Regional Housing Needs Allocation process. Wait for it. So what are our housing goals? How do they look? Well, you can see that the majority of our housing goals are low to moderate income. The low to moderate is the green color. Above moderate is in blue. And because our housing goals are set relative to today's population spread, of course, most of the population is centered around the median or below. But in terms of the housing that we actually produce, due to lack of funding and high costs, you can see that most of the housing we produce in terms of the low and moderate side, we produce about 1/3 of what we set out to do over the course of 25 years of RHNA. In terms of above moderate, we produce a little bit more. You can see that circle, outer circle, is a little bit more than what we set out to do. The census shows we also added some units that we can't track via permit data, but overall, the high-income households were far greater than the amount of above moderate income housing that we added. So what are we trying to do with this project? Well, We want to set goals that will help us address housing affordability and also inventory and evaluate the tools that we have to meet those goals so that we can improve housing affordability and meet the needs of our diverse population. And what will that actually help us do? Well, we're going to, it's going to help us measure what each individual policy, is doing relative to each other and to these goals. It's also this process is gonna help us ground the conversation around our housing policies and additional information and analysis. And this could be a model for how to change our housing element in the future. So what will the goals that we set look like? Well, they'll likely address things like stabilizing or reversing loss of low and moderate income households, reduce housing cost burdens, address the needs of diverse groups, and also support our plan to reduce homelessness. And what do the tools look like? Tenant protection, affordable housing preservation and production, and market rate housing production as well, which helps ease cost pressure and contributes funding for affordable housing. So how are we going to involve diverse voices in this process? We're going to look to the wealth of technical experts that we have in the region to look at housing economics, housing policy, demography, and forecasting. But we're also going to work with diverse groups of stakeholders, including advocates, civic organizations, the public, policymakers. And we're going to work with our city partners, MOHCD, Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, OCII, the Rent Board, and internally there are a couple of initiatives on our existing housing stock and the community stabilization and anti-displacement strategy that we're going to be coordinating with. In terms of our timeline, in late spring, we'll be releasing our housing needs and trends analysis. And then moving forward, we'll be looking at the goals that I described and our evaluation of tools. And we hope that approximately a year from now, we'll have a draft of the housing affordability strategy to share with you guys then.